Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So again, wherever you're joining us from, whether you're on your couch watching, you're at your desk during a lunch break, again, wherever you are watching, we just want to say welcome. Thank you for journeying with us. And as always, please look down at those details. You'll see there's different ways to give to help support what we do in this ministry, different ways to share these videos, different platforms that we do this on. We'd love for you to continue walking with us in this journey. And so we continue moving through the book of Genesis. And as always, we kind of get this picture again. The way to view the Bible in a responsible way is to always look at the context, always look at who it's written for and why, right? Looking at the original language, all of those things are going to be really, really helpful. And that's what we do at Ethos. That's what we do every single week. We look a little bit deeper. These words were not really intended for us in 2021, were they? Yeah. We are an audience who's looking from a different perspective from when it was written. We're kind of on the outside looking in. And so to understand what's going on inside, we need to go deeper. We need to ask lots of questions because it's an ancient text. And so important to remember Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, those first 5 books of the Old Testament, these are written for a reason. Again, they're not written to make a historically perfect, accurate account of the life and times of Israel. Not the point at all. No one's writing history books then. What they're doing is they're writing in their stories, their epic narratives, all to understand who they are, where they've been, where they're heading. And they do it with epic stories, poetry, prophetic musings, warnings. That's the purpose, that's the point. And so, again, Torah for them is written at a time when they are taken into Babylonian exile. They're a small group of people. They, just like all the other groups, are taken there to Babylon. And the question, of course, is will they assimilate? Will they take on the traits of Babylon? And, and what's fascinating about this early tribe of people called the Israelites is that they're one of the few that said, no, we're not going to assimilate. We're going to hold on to our gods. We're going to hold on to our values. We're going to hold on to our stories. We will hold on to our identity. And so Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Torah, if you're a Jew, these compilations are wonderful, beautiful pieces that help us understand who these people were and what they valued, right? Tell us a lot about how they view the divine, and it's beautiful. And so, again, it's a compilation. And so we tell people over and over again Torah is a complete narrative of Israel miniaturized through its tellings. And so today we'll step into chapter 9, which is going to be really interesting. We're going to basically look at one verse. But before we do, many times I'll get questions from people. This one comes from a good friend. And this question I wanted to basically discuss first before we step into fully chapter 9. And so the question right here is this. Do you believe, Tony, that we are in the end times? Right, and this person, they have seen certain things. They've interpreted certain ways of viewing politics, religion, all of that, and they're looking and they're saying, "Whoa, the way I read Revelation is this and this and this must be coming true. Is this the end times?" And so, my answer continues to be yes and no. And I could just leave it there, right? Yes and no, right? Let me explain to you what I mean by yes and no. Because someone who really is going to take time to understand the Bible and then use it in order to answer this question, you have to truly understand why texts are written. And so remember, most of this idea of the end times, it's coming from a couple places in the Old Testament, right? Isaiah, which is, again, a reference toward Israel, right? And then you have the book of Revelation, which is, again, written for a first century group of people who are going through some really difficult times of assimilation, persecution, right? Emperor Domitian has stepped on the stage. There's a lot going on, but those writings were not intended for Christians, non-Jews, thousands and thousands of years later. Starting at that point, understanding it that way, I would start off by saying no to your question. Do you believe we're in the end times? I would say, first off, no. And here's the reason. Again, this was not the understanding, the reason for writing Revelation. It just wasn't. They were not writing to a bunch of 21st century people living in 2021. The idea of Revelation that it's future predictions, right? That 666, all of these things are things we should be looking at for today. No, like those actually had significant meaning back then, right? We know now. Nero, right? Nero is mentioned in the book of Revelation. There's so many things written in Revelation that actually people, when they read them then, they understood the political slams of the day, right? They understood John was actually kind of pointing fingers at Emperor Domitian, right? He's pointing fingers at these different Jewish sects that were basically saying, you know what? We'll worship the emperor and we'll worship God, we'll assimilate. He is essentially pointing fingers at those people. Now, here's where I would say also yes. Yes, we are living in the end times. Now, here's why I would say yes to this. I do see many of the like westernized nations right now heading toward a bit of a collapse. And we can see this. We can see this economically, right? The stock market has been really fascinating to watch lately, right? What's going to happen, especially in America? What happens to the dollar? I don't know. That right now we're in this place of I don't know. Maybe could there be some sort of collapse? Maybe. Economically, we know interesting, crazy stuff is happening on the stock market. So, could America take a bit of a collapse in some way? Maybe. And that's just not America, but other Western worlds. Maybe, right? We're looking politically, religiously. There are all different things going on. And they have been, to be truthful. For the last 10 years, we've seen different things. So is America potentially at that place where Rome was, where again, we are experiencing tons of, we value entertainment more than we do values and agrarian life and all of those things? Well, yeah, if you understand history, the minute Rome began to focus more on less on military, less on agrarian culture, and building, meeting people's food needs, and noticing the two, the poor and the rich beginning to larger divide, all these things, focusing on purely entertainment at those points. When you see that, every single large empire that's fallen, right when they get about there, they're about to collapse. And so, in some ways, I would say yes. There are certain signs going on that happened in Rome that we can see other Western cultures and nations right now going through those same cycles. So, yes and no. I would say that would be a perfectly okay answer to give. Yes and no. But I don't. I personally, and this is me, after studying the book of Revelation, after looking at the historical context, I do not believe this was a book of future predictions that you have to decode with your decoder ring. I just don't see it that way. And maybe you do, and that's okay. But this is my response to that question. And so I hope maybe that was helpful, my yes and no answer. But let's continue. Let's keep talking about the book of Genesis. A beautiful, beautiful book. We just talked about the last book, right, in the Christian canon. Now we're going to go to the first book, which there are a lot of interesting similarities actually between the two. And we'll get into that, far later on in our study. But today, reminder, Noah. We've been talking about the character of Noah, right? Noah is the one, his name, it means to find favor in the eyes of the Lord, meaning rest. This is like the calm before the storm, right? Noah is there to guide his people, this messianic figure that's going to guide his people through the storm into freedom, right? And over again, we will see these messianic characters showing up all throughout the Old Testament. We'll see the characters of Moses, Abraham, Elijah, Joseph, Noah, all these different figures, they rise up, and the purpose for them rising up is always to lead Israel through the flood, right? The flood, metaphorical. Lead Israel through the chaos, through the brokenness, into freedom. And so Noah is one of those figures. So today we're basically looking at a very short set of verses, but there's so much beauty here, and I think it's important just to stop and take a breath on this one, because I think the application there is really rich. In fact, this one verse here, I'll show you right here, Genesis 9, 1 through 5. This one verse, this set of verses here, so thick, so heavy in context that there are actually books written on this short set of verses. Isn't that fascinating? Rabbis will spend hours lecturing over just a couple of the words in here. And so, us taking 25 minutes or so is actually just scratching the surface, if we're going to be honest, with just this short set of verses. So, I'll read it to you. It's very short. Here we go. Whoever sheds the blood of man, through man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God he made man. Pretty simple, right? But let's dig a little deeper because that's what we do here, right? Think about this first set here. Whoever sheds the blood of man, through man shall his blood be shed. Now, we are now scholars in the book of Genesis, right? We're scholars in this book. We have dug deep, right? And so, us being scholars, we immediately recognize, oh, wait a second. This reminds me of Genesis 4, right? This moment. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. Again, this idea here is the idea of the escalation of violence, right? If you do this, then I do this. And this is, of course, the reason why Jesus will say later on in the New Testament, he'll say, how many times should you forgive someone? Well, I'm going to go the very opposite of what we've done as a nation, right? Instead of escalating violence, I'm going to escalate grace and love, right? I'm going to escalate good things rather than bad. But this is a reference, of course, back to Genesis 4:24. And so once we again move down, and again, think about this. This is Israel. Israel as a nation is warning themselves through these tellings, warning themselves, if we go back down this road, it's not going to be pretty. If we choose to continue escalating violence, eye for an eye, if we choose to with our neighbors, every time one of our sheep crosses into their field and they get mad and then we get mad, before you know it, there's war, right? If we go down those roads again, there's going to be pain, there's going to be brokenness, there's going to be war. And so there's this early reminder of this idea that, look, every time we've gone down that road, every time we have shed the blood of someone else, there's more bloodshed, right? Every time we've turned and we've struck someone, we will get struck back. And it's just the way, unfortunately, of the world, and we need to learn to do something different. There's this interesting term I learned. There's a whole study on it. It's called the conflict escalation curve. And so, conflict escalation, I'll just read it for you, is the process by which conflicts grow in severity over time. And so, this may refer to conflicts between individuals or groups, interpersonal relationships, may refer to like escalation of hostilities in politics, military. There's a whole study done, like a whole process of how escalation how conflict can kind of escalate. And there's a whole curvature to it. And so, I want to share with you because I find it so fascinating, because Israel often will fall into this. And I would argue mankind in general, we seem to love following this cycle, unfortunately. And so let me share with you, because the first couple levels, I would argue they're fairly healthy. They're normal, right? It's when we take it and we move to some of the next levels, some of the levels beyond 4 or 5, things get really ugly. So let me share with you first. This is the stages of violence. So here we go. Number 1, compliant. Number 2, resistant, and they call that resistant passive. Level 3, resistant active, right? There's an action involved. Level 4, assaultive. Leo and I were looking at this word. It's kind of a new word, assaultive, interestingly enough. Assaultive here, bodily harm, right? And then the worst level, level 5, assaultive, lethal force. So think about this. Level 1, right? Compliant, cooperative. Compliant is like, it's the response in finding ways to like work together through an agreement, right? There's the compliant person who says, look, I disagree, right? There's a disagreement, yet we'll both choose to find ways to cooperate, right? There's still an intentional, like, we're going to find a way. There's some compliance involved, right? So that's level 1, and that's still somewhat healthy, right? It's okay to disagree with people. It really is. It's okay, right? But you kind of just go with the flow, right? That's level 1. Level 2 is the resistant passive, and I find this one really interesting. Resistant is the action of like choosing to take a passive stance in disagreeing, so simply like acknowledging that there's a barrier, right? This is the idea here. There's a disagreement. Here's what we disagree on this point. Got it. It's acknowledging the disagreement, acknowledging that the thing is there. We may not see eye to eye on how we view this certain interpretation. Got it, right? Politically, maybe there's a difference. Whatever it is, we acknowledge that, and that's okay. Still, like level 2, there's not much violence there, right? There's no violence, in fact. We're okay. Level 3, resistant active. Now, resistant active is which one takes like this decisive stance and chooses like, I am openly in opposition of you, right? Kind of, it's like balling your fist a little bit, right? It's beginning to get the hostility's a little bit there, but it's not directed toward the person yet. It's directed toward the idea. And so I disagree with your stance, right? Like I disagree. There's a little bit more passion to it. And again, still healthy. We can disagree with some passion, and that's okay, as long as it's not directed toward the person, right? It's not toward the person quite yet. But watch as there's a switch flipped on here. And this is where Israel, the prophets often will say this, they'll say things like, unwise is the man that chooses to bear his fist and use it. Different things like that we'll see over and over again. And so here we go. Level 4. This is the assaultive bodily harm. So we've stepped from bawling to actually hurting someone physically, right? And many of us like, whoa, that is a step forward, right? How we allow our passions to lead us there, whoa, that is unhealthy, right? But this is we've seen this over and over again in our own histories, and so has Israel, right? Assaultive is that jump from non-physical disagreement to the escalation of force to show opposition. So again, from this to this, right? Like how I use my fist there. Obviously, I'm not a fighter. We see the movement from 3 to 4. And then lastly, violence, number 5, assaultive, lethal force, right? This is where it's escalated until we see death, right? Things have gotten so bad that we have seen death. And that's when it is no longer healthy. This is where we're going to see escalation now. After we get to this point, we will, and oftentimes what most of these theories will show is after we've hit this point, level 5, we will see a cycle. Because whoever was hurt, the son of whoever's father was murdered will in turn murder the other person. And this is where you begin to see cycles, right? And the question is, of course, who will break the cycle? And Israel is asking that question in this moment, right? Stepping off the ark, we see a whole new world ahead of us. And the question that the divine is asking is, who is going to be brave enough to break the cycle? Who's going to be brave enough, right, to break this thread, to not allow it to go from 3 to 4, right? Where this thin line, again, resisting activity, again, turning to actually hurt and kill someone. Who's going to break the cycle of violence? Who will it be? Yeah, who will it be? I love what Chris Prentice says here. The minute we respond to disagreement with violence is the first sign we've stopped seeing the other person as a human being. And this is the heart of it, right? For the heart of Israel, they felt their God was saying to them over and over again, they're all human, right? We're all human. We're all part of the same race. And the minute we decide to hurt someone, and again, some prophets would disagree, right? But these prophets here in the beginning of Torah, they're saying, look, we got to break the cycle. And the way to break the cycle is to remember that we are all human. We're all made in the image of God. And the minute we forget that is the minute we begin to hurt one another. The minute we begin to kill one another, steal from one another. That's when we begin to go down this spiral, right? And we begin starting doing these crazy escalation cycles. Conflict has the potential to cause us to forget the humanity in others. And I love this picture here. After you remove the outside appearance, right? After you get past what the eye sees, we're really all just a bunch of skin and bone, aren't we? Right? We're all, when you look at our skeletons, I think this is fantastic. Black, white, gay, straight, religious, atheist, all of us. We all look pretty similar on the inside, don't we? Yeah, we've got all got the heart. We've all got these organs. We've all got these brains that are attempting to sort through all the information we're getting all the time. We forget we're all part of the same race. And when we get that and that metaphor of the race, when we understand this, we no longer are fighting to try to get to first, right? We're no longer fighting each other to see who gets things first. We learn to ride together. And it's beautiful. I wanted to share this with you. We have seen this in wars, haven't we? We've seen the dehumanization of people, right? We've seen it two different groups. You got today, we have the Proud Boys and the Antifa groups, right? And they're fighting, and you look and you realize, hey, you guys actually have more similarities than you have dissimilarities, right? You're both angry with the government. Like wake up, right? If you could stop and just talk about, have a conversation, you'd see it, right? But we dehumanize. World War II, we saw the dehumanization of a whole group of people over and over again. We've seen this in World War I as well. When you dehumanize a group of people, when you forget that we are all part of the same race, we go to some really terrible extremes, all for the sake of getting back, right? Being on top, being number one. It gets really gross quickly. So again, whoever sheds the blood of man through man, shall his blood be shed. But notice the beauty here. Notice the beauty. The two, it's almost the yin and a yang, right? There's the escalation of violence, but here's the remedy. Here's the remedy. For in the image of God, he made man. There is the remedy. When Israel is tempted to escalate the violence, when they are tempted to fall into the cycles of brokenness, chaos, pain, the reminder right there after the moment of escalation is that we are all made in the image of man. One of my favorite quotes, physics says we are made of stardust, intergalactic debris of far-flung atoms, shards of carbon nanomatter rounded up by gravity to circle the sun. As atoms pass through an eternal revolving door of possible form, energy, and mass, dance in fluid relationship. So good. We are stardust. We are man. We are thought. We are story. Right? Look at that image. That is so good. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen atoms, all in our body, right? That's what makes up our body as well. Like all these heavy elements, we are created in all these previous generations we shared these atoms with them, right? Matter cannot be created, only shared over and over again. We're all part of the same thing, right? 4.5 billion years ago, this matter has been around and it continues to be around. And you are made up of years and years and millions of years of particles and atoms that have been floating around. We're all part of the same story. And even our cellular biological makeup reminds us of that. We're all interconnected. Everything down to the very atoms that make us. Scientifically, we know when we talk to someone for more than 5 to 10 minutes, we actually begin to share atoms back and forth. That's how interconnected we are. Fascinating, right? I found it really interesting. We're so good at dividing, creating divisions with one another. But when you look at these biological, psychological, sociological elements, at their very heart of them, we're not really that different either. Think about skin. One writer says this: skin color depends upon the size, number, shape, and distribution of melanosomes, as well as the chemical nature, level of activity of their melanin. I never say that word right. Content. You and I are always 1 degree away from a different pigment shade. I thought that was so funny. So important to so many of us, but the reality is, the shade of our skin is really not that important scientifically. We are very, very similar. This can actually change very easily just given a couple generations, right? Fascinating stuff. How important is that? Another thing, I thought this was interesting. One writer says this about race, Zach Norris. The notion of race has been debunked in the world of science and is understood to be a social construct. He says race is often a dividing line for many, but even the idea of race is not even scientifically relevant. We're all just a bunch of atoms floating around in close proximity. Race, while often important to many people, scientifically is a fascinating thing because it's really a social construct. It's not a scientific one. And when we can dig away at that a bit, we'll find there's a lot of connections, less division, right? There's a lot more interconnectedness between races than there are differences. And that's fascinating to think about. Think about this politics, right? We are ripe with disagreement with politics right now. The country is completely divided. But I found this, Ron Paul, whether you love him or hate him, I loved this quote though. And let me read you this quote. Politics is the ordering of society. And again, I love that because I'm always saying that. Politics is the ordering of society and often we are divided, often violently against the other side. But what we forget is that it is order that unites us. If we can agree order needs a place, then conversation can happen. So again, politics at its like simplest level is just the ordering of society. And if we can agree on this beginning step that there needs to be an order, there needs to be a way in which we can thrive together in the middle of disagreement, in the middle of all of this, it can create conversation rather than constant division at its simplest form, right? So interesting. And this is why I like Galatians 3. I think this quote is so fantastic. There is neither Jew nor Greek, nor slave, nor free, male or female, for you are all one in Christ. Now, please understand, this is not Paul saying those things aren't important, right? Those things aren't interesting. Differences can't be appreciated. That's not what he's saying. There's something way higher level thinking here. What he's saying is Christ, again, the one proclaiming peace can happen, can be lived out, can be shared, even between polar opposite ideas, right? Should be the central, Jesus Christ should be the central way of viewing the world. Think about that. The central way, the central lens that we can view the world. And when we understand this idea that we can head toward peace, we can find shalom, we can be united even in our differences. If that's the lens that we live through, if that's the way we view the world, then we can find peace and connection everywhere we go. Violence doesn't have to be escalated. In fact, differences can be a reminder that we're all made of the same stardust. We are all interconnected, right? We are all part of this new kind of ordering of the world in which we look and say we can break old cycles and we can break them together. Yeah? So good. I had a story to share with you before I closed. A friend of mine, he was protesting, and strong protest, very strong protest over police brutality in a pretty large city. And he was protesting that day. And he said, as he was protesting, he said things were beginning to get heated. And he was a bit uncomfortable as he was watching certain people begin doing certain things that just didn't agree with his morals and his ethics. And as this is happening, he kind of pulled back a little bit from the crowd. And there was an old man sitting on this little cafe area, and one of the few that like stayed there. And the old man did this. He said, "Come here." So my friend said, "Oh, okay." So Mark walked over, and the old man said, "Hey, I want to understand what's going on," he says. And he's got kind of this like New York kind of accent. "I want to understand what's going on." Old guy. And so my friend Mark said he kind of, okay, because he didn't want to participate in what was beginning to happen. He said, all right. He sat down, and this old man started just asking Mark, like, what is the point of this? What's going on? Why are you so passionate? And Mark began to share his opinion. He began to share his stories, right? As a young kid being afraid, all these different things Mark was beginning to share. And he said he's sharing it with the man, and the man was listening. He was actively listening. He was asking questions of Mark. He was asking for more information about his stories, about experiences he had. He was asking Mark questions. And at the end, Mark noticed that the man was doing a lot of this. A lot of this. And so Mark finally said, "Do you get what I'm trying to say?" And the man smiled. And the man said, "Can I tell you my story?" Mark said, "Absolutely." So the man started to tell him his experience. And his experience, he was living in Russia as a Jewish person toward the end of World War II. And he said he went through deep persecution, especially even after World War II. Said it was very difficult for him. Everywhere he went, he was at odds with the military, and it was very difficult for him and his family to start business again. He said it was so difficult being a Jew. And Mark said the man smiled and he said, I think we have a lot in common. They had a meal together. He wished him well, and Mark said, I will never judge another person by the color of their skin. Mark being a black man, this man being a white Jewish man. It was a beautiful moment for my friend Mark. And for this man, I would argue. They came together, they had conversation. They saw deeper than the division that was happening in society. They chose to stop certain cycles from continuing. And I thought, what a beautiful story, right? So, how do we take it home, right? We need to find an application because I think that's so important. So, I was thinking many people today, we're having difficult conversations. And truth be told, a lot of us, like, they're difficult people that we have to deal with sometimes, right? And so I've been reading this book through some of the classes I'm taking as a teacher at the school I'm at, and there was really interesting stuff that they shared with me that I'm going to share with you. A book that I've found it so helpful as an educator, but also as a human being. So let me share a couple points that this book brought out that I think you might find interesting, especially if you want to break certain cycles, if you want to stop escalation. And again, I am not the professional with this. I'm learning. And these are things I learned just a couple of weeks ago that I thought this would be so good to share with you, right? So number one, listen to their complaints, but without comment. Ah, this is so hard, right? Listen to their complaints, but without comment. Be very careful that you're not feeding the negativity. I found this one really interesting. It's so easy to like jump in, right? Even if you agree with whatever's going on, whatever the complaint is, just take an active listener role, right? That is so difficult sometimes to like hold our opinion for a little bit. It's okay to hold your opinion. Hold it for a little bit. See what happens. I found that really fascinating. I've been trying this out with some of my students. Here's another one. Don't get hooked into their storylines or worked up about their attitude. Imagine you're watching stormy weather. Ah, right. Sometimes we have people who come into our lives or they'll send us angry, Facebook messages, whatever. Imagine like, here comes a storm. You see the storm. You know what storms do, right? Storms bring destruction. They're a bit out of control. When you recognize that a person is coming at you this way, well, then you can kind of buckle down, you can prepare, and you can recognize there's a storm. It's going to pass. Yeah. Number three, get curious about what's going on for them, right? Your curiosity can stay in your mind, or you can ask a truly curious question or two. So again, dig deeper, right? Most of the time, there's something deeper at the heart of whatever's going on. And if you value the relationship, you might want to ask more questions. If you don't value the relationship, well, yeah, walk away, right? But you might want to, if you value the relationship, you might want to ask some more questions or even understand why the storm, right? You might want to just ask some questions, get curious about what's going on. Number four, don't take other people's behavior personally. It is rarely about you. I thought that was kind of interesting. Oftentimes, what is said or something done or certain things can have certain perceptions. And many times those perceptions may not have anything to do with you. It might have just triggered a trauma someone has been through or fears or whatever the thing is. And so if we've asked questions, we might recognize why the behavior is there in the first place. And so oftentimes we don't have to take it personally. We can just be an active listener. Then we don't respond with anger or retaliation. It can be more of a place of listening. And again, I'm slowly learning this. And lastly, don't refrain from speaking your mind because you're attached to people liking you. Yeah. Whew. Yeah. Don't get so attached. Don't get into the discussion thinking I need to make sure this person still likes me. As a pastor, I went through this for many, many years. I wanted people to like me so badly, to support what I was doing, that sometimes I would just sit there and smile and just take it. When the reality is, it was hurting my soul, right? I wasn't standing up for myself. I wasn't giving an opinion. I was just becoming a doormat. And you don't have to live like that either. Yeah. On the flip side, though, know that self-compassion isn't permission to lash out at others in the name of loving or defending yourself. Even though you have an opinion, it does not give you the right, though, to turn around and be angry and mean. Yeah. So we can listen, we can stand up for ourselves, we can voice an opinion, but we need to do it lovingly. We need to find ways to do it without escalating the problem. I hope you found that interesting. I Those are such challenging tips that I'm going to continue attempting to do for my life, and I hope you'll do the same. And so, as always, thank you for joining us today. Ethos-church.org/donate. Please continue giving, supporting what we do. I think this is such good, rich stuff. And so please continue sharing. Genesis is such a powerful book. And I think this new year, we're going to see this YouTube channel start picking up a lot more steam. And so share this with other people. I think it's so good. And as always, Ethos Living Rooms. This has been a powerful, powerful safe space for people, especially since a lot of people are not able to gather in large groups yet. And so, doing Zoom meetings like this, where we come together as small groups of people, discussing a concept, oftentimes through the Bible, so much fun. Email me, tonywerfel@gmail.com. I'll send you the Zoom link, and man, it's going to be fun. Every single time, there's always something fascinating that happens there. And as always, hit that subscribe button. Always hit that like button if you got something from it. Everyone, take care. We love you, and we'll see you next week.